One of the most, I've taught in many different places, many different kinds of settings, and one of the most interesting teaching experiences that I have every year is participating in the Island program, which happens right here in Michigan, founded by Dr. Sherman Jackson, Munir Farid, and Suleiman Ali. I really like teaching in that program because it was founded in order to fill a gap, and the awareness was Muslim faculty who were teaching in universities, who were teaching Middle East studies or Islamic studies in universities, getting Muslim kids in their classes who came in and suddenly were shocked by Islamic history. I mean, really shocked. Most of them had never even heard of the Battle of the Camel. And, you know, within the first week of their class on Islamic history, they were suddenly felt demoralized and disillusioned, and they just did not know how to deal with this information. And I think that we have to be aware of where most Muslims in America, I'm going to focus on America, are being educated. They're being educated at their Sunday schools. Most don't go to Islamic school. What are they being taught in Sunday school? What are they being taught about Islamic law, theology, history? They're being taught in khutbahs. They're being taught what the priorities of Islam are, what the discourse, how Muslims talk about things, what kind of language, rhetoric is being used in khutbahs, what are the ethical priorities that are being taught in khutbahs. They're being taught in their public school curriculum when they take world history, or they may have religious studies or maybe a world religions course. They're being taught more than all of those things by the media, what Islam is, how Muslims speak, what Muslims care about. That includes social media, when they see what Muslims are talking about on social media. These are the things that this is teaching what Muslims should care about. They're taught primarily, probably number one, by Google. I mean, every person in America, if they want to know something about anything, the first thing they do is Google it. And I always ask my students to Google Islam, Google Muslims, Google the Quran. Go right now to Google Images and Google Muslim women. Just Google Muslim women and see what comes up. So what I'm saying is that we first have to deal with miseducation. We have a miseducation problem. And as our scholars said, to deal with Jahal Murakkab is much more difficult than Jahal Basit. Jahal Basit is simple ignorance, where you don't know about something. Oh, I don't know about this topic. I know nothing about Brazil. I'm going to read about Brazil and its capitals and its economy and its politics. It's very different than having a preformed conception or misconception of something. So it's a huge problem, because preconceived notions, having an idea anchored in your mind, there's a lot of, there are many studies on the psychology of memory, of knowledge, and it is really very difficult to deconstruct knowledge and to deconstruct information. Because information is not just an idea floating in the air, it is physical. It is the imprint on your brain of certain neural paths. That's why people are attached to their ideas, because it is literally part of their body. It is part of them. And there's a kind of pain in actually not going that way. It's like if you take a shortcut every day somewhere and someone says, no, you can't take the shortcut because you're cutting across someone's property. You have to go around the block. It's effort. People don't want to do that. So this is a very serious problem that we have. And I tell my students, I think of the beautiful teaching of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that everyone has to perform an act of charity every day, and even picking up a branch that's fallen on the path is an act of charity. As a teacher, I consider work to be that, to be trying to remove obstacles. You know, we've talked about the innate capacity, that humans have innate capacities. We have fitra, we have the capacity for reasoning, but there are a lot of obstacles for the proper functioning of those capacities. And so the reality in my context, my teaching context, is that very often, you know, it's so much about first removing those obstacles. Martha Nussbaum, who's a professor at the University of Chicago, who a philosopher, deals in international human rights, she talks about the foundation for human rights really has to be a focus on capacities. That all human beings have certain capacities. And the goal of human rights should not be to say that people have to live different ways, but they should be able to live in an environment that allows them to retain the ability to make the choices, right? So that their education or their political environment or their economic environment shouldn't shut down their ability to choose one kind of way of living or another. So if we think about food security, for example, children, if they are severely malnourished, actually can lose the capacity for thinking at a higher level. It affects IQ and intelligence, right? So this is why those issues are relevant to education. You know, it's not just a tangential issue. It is actually, nutrition is relevant to education. Physical education is relevant to it because it does have an effect on thinking, on your ability to think. So I would like us to consider in our institutions, all of our institutions, where we are helping to build capacity and where we are closing down opportunities for people. And inevitably, those of us involved in higher education need to help others in our community who are involved in education at the broader public level, within the masajid, within the Sunday schools, the Islamic schools, to really understand what their role is so that they are not unwittingly closing down capacities and opportunities, and we don't then end up with this process of deconstruction. And that's also in the public school system as well. I mean, when I think, I was educated at Catholic schools, very good Catholic schools in Canada. Actually, the school where I lived in was an extremely economically deprived neighborhood, although my family was not economically deprived, but the neighborhood was. But the school was amazing, and one of the things that they did was not only to give knowledge and information and books, but we had to do things. We not only had to do social justice, now students do volunteerism, certain 40 hours a week or for their whole thing. In grade 5, I was taking the city bus to a home for severely disabled children and cleaning and fooding and feeding children who had gigantic hydrocephalic heads. I mean, I was 10 years old and and we had to do that every year. I mean, it wasn't something we checked off, that was just something we did. That was building my capacity to have some kind of resilience in the face of difficulty, to how to deal that balance between compassion and revulsion, because some situations are horrible, to be able to have a kind of independence and being able, to do that, not being just coddled in it, but being in a situation where it was, I had to handle it. We also had speech contests from I think grade 2. Everyone had to, at the level you were, right? We used to go to elementary school till grade 8 or 8th grade. I'm so binational now, I have trouble with my language between America and Canada. But we had to research a topic and then stand up in front of the whole class and give a speech, and a few people from the class then would go and give the speech in front of the whole school. I did that every year throughout elementary school. So these are all capacity building projects that need to happen in education. This allows us to have a kind of confidence that is built on something solid and not something artificial. Because what I see is that there is a lot of, we deal in a time of great mobility, displacement, uncertainty, where we're being attacked and feel defensive, and people are seeking false security. They're seeking false security in the charismatic leader who says, just do what I say and everything will be fine. And so many people are susceptible to false security because they don't have within themselves the confidence. The confidence has to come from knowledge, from study, from an embodied knowledge and skill and ability. So things like, the idea of memorization, there's a lot of pedagogy about this, is that this is embodying knowledge. And that grounds you. You've got that stuff in you. It's holding you secure in the midst of all of this kind of transition and change. So all of these things are important because otherwise we see people running for the answer, and there are those who are willing to give the answer. This is the nature of paternalism in a benign form, and authoritarianism in a negative form. So there are always people who are willing to say, just follow me and you'll be on the right path. And we see there's people who, you don't have to be a child. There are 40-year-olds who are this way. And if the person happens to be a good, well-meaning person, then it's a kind of, soft paternalism, but that person is not going to do much for this ummah. They're just a follower who's sitting there not really benefiting. They're just feeling safe and secure, with their kind of spiritual father or community father who's not going to let them go astray. But they're not going to be much of a benefit. But of course the risk is that when you have that attitude, you can easily also be susceptible to authoritarianism. And anyone who has a lot of power, a lot of followers, we know absolute power corrupts, and even a good person can end up misusing this. Confidence, I remember Wadad Padi, who was a professor at the University of Chicago, giving a speech one time where one of the things she noticed about the difference between classical Islamic civilization, I think this is something to do with maybe most of what you were saying, although I apologize, I came late because I was in another meeting. She said one of the differences she noticed between contemporary Muslim culture and classical Islamic civilization is that Muslims in classical Islamic civilization had so much confidence they really weren't threatened by ideas. I mean, the kind of bizarre ideas, behaviors, personalities, quirky people, just a circus of people in Islamic civilization, and it didn't threaten them. They had the confidence of their institutions, of their belief, that they didn't think this one person who was a little bit off, or even this one group roaming around the streets wearing, sort of like pre-modern dervish punks almost, they didn't consider them a threat to all of the Ummah and Islam and civilization. They were tolerated and kind of, sometimes asked to move along, but it wasn't as if it was going to bring down the whole Muslim world. And so that comes from the solidity of a true education. It comes from good institutions. It comes from understanding the difference between, and I know I have to finish because then I have to go, we probably all have to go to something at 11:30, but the difference between the human element and the divine. We're all seeking the divine. We're on that, as Bernard Weiss, has that beautiful title of his study of Ahmadi, the search for God's law, right? We're searching, we're looking, we're trying, we're attempting. But what good education does is it helps us be humble because we understand the human element, and we are the human element, And that's why I think history is so important. The history, not of the political, the rise and fall of kings and this and that. That's, if you're interested in, that's fine. I find it exceedingly boring. I'm not that interested. But the history of our institutions, the history of schools of thought, we need to know this so that we know how we got where we are. We need to understand that when we have beliefs, that they have been some of our beliefs have been formed or articulated, all of them have been articulated in a certain context. And we may be able to use different kinds of language to say the same things, or we may be able to say it a little bit differently. But the confusion between, when we teach about Islam, as if it's all thrown in there, as if Tawheed, belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the same as every other thing that Muslims have done or believe in, is really problematic. This is why people panic, because they think that, these Western Muslim professors are trying to take down their religion when they're not. It's about providing context, not about taking down religion. And but for the Muslim professor, there's always, there was a great article in the New York Times, I think last week, I think it was in the New York Times, about what students really want from teachers, and this is generally in American education. And they want, this article stressed, and I absolutely believe this, is that they want mentors as much as people to give them information. They're going through this development. They're becoming adults. They're going through intellectual development. And we all need to do that. In theological education, that's called formation. And what it means is that we provide a safe environment for discussion and growth and debate. It's different than paternalism. We're not trying to protect them from everything, but we're trying to be supportive and responsive to who they are and their needs. So not every student has a different, a state, we could say, whether it's a spiritual state, intellectual, their history, their context. So we need to have pedagogies that are responsive to that and understand that we're helping them grow as spiritual and intellectual people, and not just have this terrible model of education, which is test-based, that has been dominated in American education. Finally, Imanze talked about poetry. I just want to say one thing finally about an important pedagogical technique, and that's storytelling. Storytelling is really is effective and is an important technique, because what it does is it connects us to wisdom of the past, which is not the same, which is not always documented in text. When we look at the text, law, theology, etc., we don't always see the wisdom there. And it's really important that if we see how the Quran emphasizes al-ma'ruf, or the emphasis in Islamic law on urf and adat, this is a lot about the wisdom and the morality and the ethics of the community. And how do people learn that? One of the ways is through storytelling. And by storytelling, I don't mean novel and fiction, but that's fine. What I mean is people in the community telling their stories, how they got there, what they did in this situation. You learn so much about how to be a Muslim in the world when you listen to our brothers and sisters, so-called ordinary Muslims tell the most extraordinary stories of how they came to be where they are, escaping, fleeing war, going through what they did, what they encountered, the people they encountered. All of these things help us connect to the reality of what it is to be a Muslim. It helps narrow the gap between the elite, the intellectual and religious elite, and the so-called ordinary people. It also allows very often women's voices to be more active and present, that are not always, that kind of knowledge, that practical skill, the practical ethics. Sometimes we talk about situational ethics. It allows that to come forward. So I'd love to see more of that in our educational institutions.